cruel billionaire heartlessly divorced his devoted wife. 15 years later, his own son shocked everyone by punching him at his lavish second marriage. Hi, my beautiful family. May the Almighty rain His endless mercy upon you like gentle drops that heal every wound and wash away every sorrow. May He place in your hearts a light so radiant that no darkness can ever dim it. May every woman in this family shine with dignity and strength, every man walk with wisdom and kindness, and every child grow surrounded by love and laughter that never fades. I pray your homes become gardens of peace, where patience blossoms, joy overflows, and unity is the fragrance of every day. May your struggles transform into stepping stones of success, your fears into courage, and your tears into rivers of hope. May God protect you in every path, lift you when you fall, and hold your family in His eternal care. My family, you are not just viewers. You are my heartbeat, my soul, and my treasure. With you, every story becomes a prayer, and every prayer becomes a blessing. If your heart is true, right, present. If your love is real, right, I am with Mr. Peter. Mariana had learned that promises made in moonlight often rot by morning. She remembered the night Scott Remington first told her she was beautiful. Not just beautiful, luminous, he'd said, like she carried starlight in her bones. He'd taken her hand in that garden, surrounded by jasmine and possibility, and promised her a life she'd only seen in magazines. A life where she'd never worry, never want, never feel small. What? A spectacular liar he'd turned out to be to the estate where she lived now, though lived felt too generous a word. For what she did within these walls, sprawled across manicured lawns like a monument to excess, marble floors that echoed with her footsteps, crystal chandeliers that caught light but never warmth, rooms so vast they swallowed sound. From the outside, it looked like paradise. From the inside, it felt like a beautifully decorated tomb. Mariana, Scott's voice cut through the morning silence. Where the hell is my breakfast? She moved quickly, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. In the kitchen, she'd already prepared everything. Eggs precisely as he liked them, toast cut diagonally, coffee strong enough to strip paint. She arranged it all on the tray with hands that had learned not to shake. When she entered the dining room, Scott didn't look up from his newspaper. He never did. She placed the tray before him with the care of someone handling explosives. "It's cold," he said flatly. It wasn't. She'd timed it perfectly, but she'd learned that truth didn't matter in this house, only his version of it. "I'll make fresh," she said quietly. "Don't bother. You've already ruined it." He pushed the tray away with disgust, nearly toppling the coffee. "Do you know what I had to listen to last night? Gerald Thornton asking me if my wife was feeling well. Apparently, you barely spoke 2 words at dinner." "I was tired." "Tired?" He finally looked at her, his eyes cold as winter stone. "You're tired? I provide you with everything. This house, those clothes on your back, the food you eat. And you can't manage a simple conversation with my colleagues." She wanted to say she'd tried. That his colleague Gerald had spent the entire evening making subtle comments about her background, her education, her right to be sitting at that table. That Scott had laughed along with every veiled insult, never once defending her. That she'd stayed silent because speaking only made things worse. But she said nothing. Silence had become her first language in this house. "You're an embarrassment," Scott continued, standing now, buttoning his suit jacket with sharp, angry movements. "I took you from nothing, and this is how you repay me. By making me look like a fool?" The words landed like stones. She absorbed them the way she'd learned to absorb everything, letting them sink deep where they could fester in private. He grabbed his briefcase and headed for the door, pausing only to deliver his final blow. "My mother was right about you. Some people are meant to serve, not to sit at the table." The door slammed. The sound echoed through the vast, empty house. Mariana stood there for a long moment, staring at the untouched breakfast. Then she picked up the tray, carried it back to the kitchen, and very carefully set it on the counter. Her hands were steady. They were always steady now. She'd learned to keep the shaking internal. This was her life. Days that bled into each other, marked only by his moods, his demands, his casual cruelties. She'd stopped calling her friends. He'd made it clear they weren't appropriate for someone in her position. She'd stopped pursuing her interests. He'd laughed at her painting, called her poetry childish scribblings. She'd even stopped looking in mirrors, because the woman staring back had become a stranger wearing her face. The months crawled by like wounded animals. She became a ghost in her own life, present but not living, breathing but not alive. Scott paraded her at parties when he needed a wife for appearances, then ignored her completely once they returned home. She learned to smile on command, to laugh at the right moments, to disappear when required. The breaking point came on an ordinary day that felt like all the others. She remembered because the gardener was trimming roses when Scott came home early. She heard his car in the driveway and felt her stomach clench. He never came home early unless something was wrong. He found her in the sitting room, a book open in her lap that she'd been pretending to read. "We need to talk," he said. His voice carrying that particular tone she'd learned to dread. Of course. She closed the book carefully, marking her page, though she hadn't absorbed a single word. He didn't sit. He stood over her, and she realized, with a cold clarity, that he'd positioned himself deliberately, forcing her to look up at him, reinforcing the power dynamic that had always existed between them. "This isn't working," he said simply. Her heart began to hammer. "What isn't?" "This, us, you." He gestured vaguely, as if she were a piece of furniture he'd grown tired of. "I've spoken with my attorney. I'm filing for divorce." The word hung in the air like smoke. Divorce, freedom and devastation wrapped in 7 letters. "Scott, please." She stood, reaching for him, but he stepped back as if her touch might contaminate him. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You'll leave quietly, take what's yours, and we'll both move on. What's mine?" Her voice cracked. "You've made sure I have nothing. No job, no money of my own, no—" "That's not my problem." His face remained impassive, carved from ice. "You should have thought about that before you became such a disappointment." "We have a son." The words burst from her, desperate. "Scott, Josh is barely walking. You can't just— I can do whatever I want." He pulled papers from his briefcase, thick and official-looking. "Sign these." She stared at the documents, her vision blurring. Somewhere in those paragraphs of legal language was the dissolution of her life, the end of everything she'd believed in when she'd said, "I do." "And if I don't?" He smiled then, cold and sharp. "Then my attorneys will make your life hell. They'll drag this through courts until you have nothing left to fight with. Sign now, leave with your dignity. Fight me and I'll make sure you lose everything." Her hands trembled as she took the pen. She thought about fighting, about refusing, about standing up for herself the way she should have done years ago. But she was so tired, so broken. And somewhere in this enormous house, her baby was sleeping, innocent and perfect, deserving better than parents who tear each other apart. She signed. Each stroke of the pen felt like cutting pieces from her own flesh. When it was done, Scott took the papers without a word, tucked them back into his briefcase, and walked toward the door. "You have until the end of the week," he said without turning around. "Take your personal items. Everything else stays. Where am I supposed to go?" He paused at the threshold, and for just a moment she thought she saw something flicker in his expression. Regret maybe, conscience, but then it was gone, replaced by that familiar cold contempt. "Frankly, Mariana, I don't care." The door closed. This time, the sound felt final. She stood alone in that cavernous room, surrounded by luxury that had never been hers, holding papers that made her poverty official. Upstairs, Josh began to cry. He'd woken from his nap. She could hear him calling for her, his small voice echoing through the house. Mariana wiped her eyes, straightened her spine, and went to her son. Whatever came next, whatever fresh hell awaited her beyond these walls, she would face it. She had to, because that little boy upstairs needed her to be strong enough for both of them. Days later, she stood on the sidewalk outside the estate with 2 suitcases and her son in her arms, watching Scott's world shrink behind her. Within weeks, she'd heard through mutual acquaintances, the few who still dared speak to her, that he'd already been seen with another woman. Younger, more polished, more suitable to his position. The news didn't break her. She was already broken. But as she sat in her cramped studio apartment that first night, Josh finally asleep on a second-hand mattress on the floor, Mariana made herself a promise. She would survive this. She would rebuild. And most importantly, she would make sure her son never learned cruelty from watching her crumble. She held Josh close, feeling his warm breath against her neck, and whispered into the darkness, "I'm sorry you got him as a father, but I swear on everything I am, you'll never become him. You'll be better. You'll be everything." Outside, the city hummed with indifferent life, and somewhere in his mansion, Scott Remington slept peacefully, having already forgotten the family he'd discarded like yesterday's. Newspaper. Chapter 2. The vow carved in. Silence. Josh's first memory was the sound of his mother crying behind a locked bathroom door. He must have been small, enough that the doorknob seemed impossibly high, small enough that he had to press his whole body against the wood to feel close to her. The sounds coming from inside weren't loud. His mother had learned to cry quietly, to muffle her pain, so it wouldn't leak into the world where her son might find it. But children know. They always know. "Mama?" His voice had been tiny, uncertain. "Mama, why are you sad?" The crying stopped immediately. He heard water running, the sounds of composure being forcibly assembled. When she emerged, her eyes were red, but her smile was bright, too bright, the way broken things shine when they catch the light wrong. "I'm not sad, baby. Just tired." "Are you hungry?" She was always tired, and they were always hungry. Growing up in their small apartment felt like living in a different universe from the one other children inhabited. Josh watched kids at school open lunchboxes filled with treats he'd only seen in commercials. He wore clothes from donation bins while his classmates showed off the latest fashions. He learned early that some questions, "Why don't we have a car? Why can't we go on vacation? Where's my dad?" made his mother's smile crack at the edges. He stopped asking. Instead, he watched. He absorbed. He learned to read the fine print of poverty that others took for granted. The way his mother checked price tags twice before putting anything in their cart. The way she skipped meals but always made sure his plate was full. The way she worked multiple jobs, coming home with exhaustion carved into her face like scripture. "You're so smart," she'd tell him, helping with homework at their tiny kitchen table after her long shifts. "Smarter than anyone I know. You're going to do amazing things." He believed her because he had to. Because if he didn't become amazing, then all her sacrifice meant nothing. The older he got, the more he understood. His father, Scott Remington, a name spoken rarely and never with kindness, had money. Lots of it. Enough to live in a house with more rooms than people. Enough to take vacations and buy new cars and never check price tags. Enough to help the son he'd abandoned, but help never came. No child support checks, no birthday cards, no phone calls checking if Josh had outgrown his shoes or needed school supplies. Nothing. Silence so complete it became its own kind of violence. Josh learned about his father in fragments. A newspaper article mentioning Scott's latest venture. A glimpse of him on the local news, all polished smile and expensive suit. Once by accident, Josh saw him in person, stepping out of a restaurant downtown, laughing with colleagues, looking prosperous and unburdened. Their eyes had met for half a second. Scott's gaze had slid right past his son, as if Josh were invisible, just another face in the crowd. Then he'd climbed into his luxury car and driven away. Josh had stood on that sidewalk for a long time, unable to move, understanding with crystal clarity that his father hadn't failed to recognize him. He'd simply chosen not to. That night, Josh made his vow. He was young then, too young to understand the full weight of what he was promising himself. But he took out a notebook, one he'd been given at school for free because his mother couldn't afford supplies. And he wrote in careful block letters, "I will make him remember. I will restore what he stole." He hid the notebook under his mattress and attacked his life with new purpose. School became his weapon. Every test was a battle he refused to lose. Every grade was proof that his father's absence hadn't broken him. He stayed late in the library, studied by streetlight when they couldn't afford the electric bill, memorized textbooks because they couldn't afford to buy them. His teachers noticed. "Your son is exceptional," they told Mariana during parent conferences. "Have you considered applying for scholarships?" Scholarships. The word sounded like salvation. By the time Josh reached high school, he'd transformed himself into an academic force. Top of his class. Awards lining their small apartment. College recruiters sending letters. His mother kept every single one in a box, touching them sometimes like they were holy relics. "I'm so proud of you," she'd say, and her voice would crack with emotions too big for words. "I'm going to take care of you," he'd promise. "One day I'm going to give you everything." "You already give me everything," she'd whisper back. "You're here. You're good. You're nothing like him. Nothing like him." The highest praise she could offer, but taking care of her couldn't wait for one day. Josh realized that the summer he became old enough to work. His mother came home from her shift at the diner. She'd been on her feet for hours, and her exhaustion had weight, like something physical crushing her from above. She tried to hide it. She smiled, asked about his day, started preparing dinner from whatever scraps they had in the refrigerator. But Josh saw her wince when she walked, saw her grip the counter for support. "Sit down," he said. "I'll cook. Baby, you don't have to." "Sit down." She did, more from surprise than obedience. Josh made pasta, the cheap kind that came in bulk, and added whatever vegetables were on sale. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot and filling, and when he placed it in front of her, she looked at him like he'd handed her the world. That's when he decided. Waiting until college wouldn't be enough? She needed help now. He started looking for work the next day. At his age, options were limited. Grocery stores, fast food, anything that would hire someone still in school. He lied about his availability, promising flexibility he couldn't deliver. He worked early mornings before school, late nights after homework, weekends when other kids were hanging out with friends he didn't have time to make. The exhaustion hit him like a truck. He'd fall asleep in class sometimes, jerking awake to the sound of his teacher's voice. His grades wobbled slightly, still excellent but no longer perfect. "Josh, is everything okay?" His counselor asked one afternoon, concern creasing her forehead. "Everything's fine," he lied smoothly. "Just a lot on my mind." What was on his mind was the money slowly accumulating in the coffee can he kept hidden in his closet. Bills and coins he'd earned loading trucks at dawn, stocking shelves at midnight, delivering groceries in the brutal summer heat. He gave it to his mother in small doses, hiding cash in places she'd find it. Inside the sugar jar, between pages of her favorite book, in her coat pocket. Never enough at once to make her suspicious, just enough to help. "Josh, did you put this here?" she'd ask, holding up bills with trembling fingers. "Found it in the couch," he'd say casually. "Or someone at work owed me. Or bonus for good grades." She wanted to believe him, so she did. Because the alternative, that her teenage son was working himself to exhaustion to support her, was too painful to accept. But one morning, she found one of his paychecks. He'd been careless, left it in his jeans pocket before throwing them in the laundry. She stood in the doorway of his room at dawn, the crumpled check in her hand, tears streaming down her face. "Josh." Her voice broke on his name. "Baby, how long have you been working?" He sat up, caught, his usual defenses useless against her grief. "It's not a big deal, Mama, not a big deal." She crossed the room, sat on his bed, took his face in her hands. "You're a child. You shouldn't be taking care of me. I'm supposed to take care of you. You do take care of me. You always have. Not well enough, apparently." "Stop," His voice came out fiercer than intended. "Don't you dare say that! You've given me everything that matters." "Josh, he has money," Josh said, the words erupting like something volcanic. "He has so much money he doesn't know what to do with it. And we're here struggling because he decided we weren't worth his time. That's not your fault. That's his choice, his cruelty." And someday he stopped himself, but his mother saw it. Saw the anger, the promise, the dark determination living in her son's eyes. "Someday what?" she asked quietly. "Someday he'll understand what he threw away." Mariana held her son then, this boy becoming a man, this child who'd inherited her strength and turned it into something sharp. She held him and wept, and he held her back, neither of them speaking the truth they both knew, that this kind of abandonment carves wounds that never fully heal. From that day forward, she stopped fighting him on the work. They had an unspoken agreement. He would pursue his education with everything he had, and she would let him help carry the weight of their survival. They became partners in endurance, two people learning to thrive, despite the man who tried to bury them both. Josh kept his notebook under the mattress. Every night before sleep, he'd take it out and add to his vow. New promises, new plans, a ledger of debts that would someday come due. His mother never poisoned his heart with hatred. She never spoke cruelly of Scott, never encouraged vengeance, never fed the darkness that could have consumed them both. But she didn't have to. Josh's rage grew on its own, nurtured by every bill she struggled to pay, every extra shift she worked, every time he saw exhaustion turn her beautiful face into something carved and hollow. On Josh's birthday one year, Mariana gave him a small box wrapped in newspaper. They couldn't afford fancy paper. "What is this?" he asked. "Open it. Inside were letters. Many of them, yellowed with age, each one addressed to Scott Remington. Each one sealed but never sent. I wrote these over the years," she explained softly. "When I was angry, when I was sad, when I wanted him to know what he was missing, but I never mailed them. I kept them instead, as proof that I tried to keep grace in my heart." Josh read one. Then another. They were devastating in their gentleness. Updates about their son, pleas for basic support, questions about why he'd chosen cruelty over connection. Not one contained hatred. Each was a masterclass in dignity. "Why are you giving these to me?" His throat felt tight. "Because you need to understand something, baby. Revenge will eat you alive if you let it. I kept grace by writing these and never sending them. You need to find your own way to peace." Josh carefully placed the letters back in the box. "I'll find peace, Mama, I promise. But first, I need to settle accounts." She didn't argue. She simply kissed his forehead and whispered, "Just don't let him turn you into something you're not. Don't let him win by making you cruel." "Never," Josh promised. "I'll never be him," and he meant it. But that didn't mean his father would escape the reckoning coming for him like thunder on the horizon. Chapter 3. The Ghost of Abandonment. Scott Remington had mastered the art of forgetting. He never once asked if his son needed shoes. Years passed in the way they do when you're deliberately avoiding uncomfortable truths. Scott built his empire higher, his reputation shinier, his conscience quieter. He married again, a woman named Lydia, who stayed for a while before realizing she'd been cast as a prop in someone else's performance. When she left, he barely noticed. Women came and went. Money stayed. That was the equation that made sense to him. Josh and Mariana existed in his mind the way bad dreams do, vague, uncomfortable, easy to dismiss in daylight. He never asked about his son, never wondered if the boy had grown tall or inherited his mother's eyes, never checked if they had food, shelter, safety. The disconnect was so complete it bordered on pathological, but Scott had convinced himself it was simply moving on. Clean breaks, no looking back. Meanwhile, across the city, Josh was learning lessons his father would never understand. He learned that dignity doesn't require wealth, that strength isn't measured in bank accounts, that a woman working double shifts to keep her son fed possesses more courage than men who inherited their fortunes and called it success. Mariana never spoke badly of Scott. Not once. Not even when Josh asked direct questions. Why doesn't he care about us? Josh had demanded one night during his teenage years, frustration making his voice sharp. His mother had set down the shirt she was mending, always mending, never buying new, and looked at him with eyes that held more sadness than anger. Some people are built different, baby. They can't see past themselves. It's not about you not being worthy of love. It's about him not being capable of giving it. That's an excuse. No, it's an explanation. There's a difference. I don't forgive him. I'm not asking you to, she'd said gently. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, not him. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, it's your choice. But don't carry hate around like a stone in your pocket. It'll wear a hole right through you. Josh understood what she was trying to teach him. But understanding and accepting were different countries separated by an ocean of hurt. He studied his father from a distance, piecing together a portrait from newspaper articles and social media posts Scott's friends shared publicly. The man lived like royalty, expensive restaurants, exotic vacations, charity galas, where he smiled for cameras and pretended to care about causes he'd never personally experienced. In one photograph, Scott stood with a group of colleagues, raising a glass of champagne, his teeth white and perfect, his suit tailored to precision. Josh had stared at that photo for a long time, memorizing every detail. This man, this stranger who shared his DNA, looked happy, unburdened, free. Meanwhile, Josh had spent that same evening helping his mother stretch a chicken across several meals and listening to her apologize for not being able to afford new textbooks. The injustice of it burned like acid, but Josh didn't let it destroy him. Instead, he transformed it into fuel. He attacked his education with religious fervor. While other students complained about homework, Josh saw every assignment as another brick in the foundation of his future. While his peers partied on weekends, Josh worked shifts at the loading dock and studied in the gaps between. College came with scholarships, multiple, stacked carefully to cover tuition, books, housing. He chose a path that would lead to stability, respect, achievement. Not because he loved the subject particularly, but because it offered the clearest route to the life his mother deserved. "You're going to college," Mariana had whispered when the acceptance letters arrived, touching them like they might dissolve. "My baby's going to college. We're going to be okay," Josh promised, pulling her into a hug. "Everything's going to change," and it did. Slowly, painfully, like watching a seed crack through concrete, Josh rose. He graduated top of his class, found employment that came with real paychecks, benefits, respect, moved his mother out of that cramped apartment into a real house with a yard and windows that let in light, bought her new clothes, a reliable car, groceries without checking the prices first. "This is too much," she'd protested weakly. "It's not enough," he'd replied. "It'll never be enough to make up for what you sacrificed." "I didn't sacrifice anything, Josh. You were never a burden, I know, but he treated us like we were. And that debt is still outstanding." She'd looked at him then with something like worry. "Just don't let him live in your head rent-free. You've built something beautiful here. Don't let his absence poison it." "I won't let him poison anything," Josh had assured her. "But I won't let him forget us either." His professional reputation grew. People who knew Scott Remington began knowing Josh too, not as Scott's abandoned son, but as a force in his own right. It was subtle at first. A name mentioned in conversation, a recommendation that carried weight. Respect earned through competence, not connections. Josh never brought up his father. He didn't have to. In certain circles, word traveled. Whispers started. "Isn't that Scott Remington's son? I heard he did that without any help from his father." Makes you wonder what kind of man abandoned something like that. Scott heard the whispers eventually. It was inevitable. Their city wasn't that large, and their circles, though different, occasionally overlapped. The first time someone mentioned Josh's name in Scott's presence, his reaction was telling. A flicker of something, discomfort, maybe guilt, crossed his face before he smoothed it into indifference. "Ancient history," he'd said dismissively. "I've moved on, but history isn't as easy to dismiss as Scott believed." It has a way of circling back, of demanding acknowledgement, of presenting bills for debts you thought you'd escaped. Josh knew this. He was counting on it. He built his life carefully, deliberately, creating success that stood independent of his father, while simultaneously throwing Scott's failures into sharp relief. Every achievement was a quiet accusation. This is what you abandoned. This is what you deemed unworthy. This is what grew despite you, not because of you. Mariana watched her son's ascent with pride, tangled with worry. She saw the steel in him, the determination that had calcified into something harder than ambition. She recognized the look in his eyes when anyone mentioned Scott's name, a coldness that hadn't been there when he was young. "You're a good man," she'd tell him often, as if repetition could make it permanent. "Don't lose that trying to prove something to someone who doesn't deserve your energy." "I'm not proving anything to him," Josh would reply. "I'm proving it to you, and to that kid who wore second-hand shoes and pretended not to be hungry. Him I owe everything." The years accumulated. Josh's success solidified. Mariana settled into the comfortable life her son provided, though she never quite lost the habit of checking price tags or saving leftovers. Some survival instincts, once learned, never fully fade. Scott continued his life of carefully curated appearances. He dated women who looked good in photographs, attended events that enhanced his reputation, made donations to charities that would get his name engraved on plaques. On the surface, his life looked enviable, but surfaces lie. His relationships were shallow, his friendships transactional, his wealth substantial, but his life oddly hollow. Not that Scott spent time examining these truths. Self-reflection was for people with regrets, and Scott had successfully convinced himself he had none, until the day he received a wedding invitation, his own. It was his assistant who'd prepared it. Actually, following his instructions for the guest list, the venue, the expensive details that would make this ceremony worth photographing. His third marriage, or was it fourth? He'd lost count. To a woman young enough to make his colleagues envious, pretty enough to look good in photos, agreeable enough not to challenge him. Faye Holbrook had said yes when he proposed, and Scott had felt satisfied. Not in love, he wasn't sure he remembered what that felt like, but satisfied. She would look excellent on his arm. That was the metric that mattered. "This will be beautiful," Faye had gushed, flipping through venue options. "Everyone will be so impressed." "That's the idea," Scott had agreed, not catching the hollowness in his own words. He didn't think about his first marriage. Didn't let himself remember Mariana's face when he'd handed her divorce papers, or the sound of his infant son crying in the background as she signed away her claim to his life. Those memories were locked in rooms he didn't visit, but rooms have a way of opening on their own, especially when someone holds the key. Josh had been following his father's life with quiet attention, not obsessively. He had better things to do, but enough to stay informed. So when news filtered through mutual acquaintances that Scott was planning another elaborate wedding, Josh felt something click into place. Timing, he'd learned, was everything. "Mama," he'd said one evening over dinner, his voice carefully casual. "Did you hear Scott's getting married again?" Mariana's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "I heard something about that. Big ceremony. Lots of guests. The works." "Good for him," she said, but her voice carried no conviction. "You don't mean that?" "No," she admitted, "but I also don't care enough to mean anything else. He's not my problem anymore, Josh. He hasn't been for a long time." Josh set down his own fork, meeting his mother's eyes. "What if we made him care?" "Josh, not for us. We don't need anything from him, but for the truth. For acknowledgement. For all the years he pretended we didn't exist." Mariana's expression shifted into something that looked like fear. "Baby, what are you planning?" "Nothing that will hurt anyone who doesn't deserve it," Josh said quietly. "But he doesn't get to rewrite history. He doesn't get to play the devoted family man while we're erased from his story. Revenge won't heal anything." "I'm not looking for revenge, Mama. I'm looking for justice. There's a difference." She studied his face for a long moment, seeing the man he'd become, strong, principled, determined. Not cruel, but no longer willing to let cruelty go unchallenged. "I can't stop you," she finally said. "But please, Josh, whatever you're thinking of doing, don't let it turn you into something you're not. Don't let him win by making you hard." Josh reached across the table, taking his mother's hand. "I promise you I will never become him, but I also won't let him forget what he did. Not anymore. He's had years of comfortable amnesia. That ends now." Outside, night settled over the city. Somewhere in his mansion, Scott Remington slept peacefully, dreaming of his upcoming wedding, blissfully unaware that the past he'd buried was about to claw its way back to the surface. And Josh sat at his kitchen table, his mother's hand in his, feeling the weight of years settle into something solid and unshakable. Not hatred, exactly, but a determination that felt just as permanent. The ghost of abandonment was about to take solid form, and it carried with it an accounting that could no longer be delayed. Chapter 4. The Rise from Ashes. By the time Josh reached full adulthood, he had become the man his father pretended to be. There's a particular kind of success that comes from spite, not the bitter, destructive kind, but the transformative variety that turns pain into power. Josh had mastered this alchemy. Every obstacle his father's absence created, Josh had vaulted over with the kind of grace that looked effortless but cost everything. His professional life flourished in ways that had nothing to do with family connections and everything to do with relentless competence. He built his reputation one careful brick at a time, earning respect through work that spoke louder than any surname could. People liked Josh, not because he charmed them, though he could when necessary, but because he treated everyone with the same baseline of dignity his mother had taught him. The custodian and the executive received the same courtesy, the same respect, the same genuine attention. In a world where most people measured worth by proximity to power, Josh's consistency was revolutionary. "You're nothing like your father," a colleague had remarked once, not knowing the landmine he'd stepped on. Josh had smiled thinly. "I know, that's intentional." The comment had puzzled the man, but Josh didn't elaborate. He never discussed his family history unless absolutely necessary. His father was a topic he kept locked away, not from shame, but from strategy. Every word spoken about Scott gave the man power he didn't deserve. Silence, Josh had learned, could be its own kind of violence. But silence didn't mean inaction. Josh had spent years quietly documenting everything. Every missed child support payment, every legal obligation Scott had slithered out of through expensive attorneys, every photograph of Scott at expensive restaurants during the same periods when Josh and Mariana had relied on food banks. The evidence accumulated like water behind a dam, patient and potentially devastating. He kept it all in a file, both digital and physical, that he never showed his mother. She wouldn't have approved. Mariana had moved forward by choosing grace, by refusing to let bitterness calcify in her heart. Josh respected that, admired it even. But he'd chosen a different path. "You work too hard," Mariana would tell him, watching him at his computer late into the evening. "You've already proven everything you need to prove." "I'm not trying to prove anything, Mama. I'm just making sure we never go back to how things were." "We won't. You've built something solid here." "I know. But solid can crumble if you're not careful," she'd sigh, recognizing the fear beneath his words, that poverty wasn't a past condition, but a constant threat, that security was always one disaster away from evaporating. These were the scars their years of struggle had carved, invisible but permanent. Josh had moved his mother into a proper house years earlier. Not a mansion. He wasn't trying to compete with Scott on those terms, but a comfortable home, with a garden where she could grow vegetables and flowers, with windows that let in natural light, with space enough that she never felt cramped. The first night in that house, Mariana had walked through each room, touching the walls, like she couldn't quite believe they were real. "This is too much," she'd whispered. "It's not even close to enough," Josh had replied firmly. "You deserve a palace. This is just a down payment on everything I owe you. You don't owe me anything. I owe you everything." His voice had caught. "Every good thing I am, every success I've had, every moment I didn't give up, that's all you. You kept us alive when he tried to erase us. This house? It's not charity, Mama. It's the tiniest fraction of what you're owed." She'd cried then, and Josh had held her, feeling the weight of years pressing against them both. Years of struggle, of sacrifice, of dignity maintained against impossible odds. The house became Mariana's sanctuary. She filled it with life. Plants in every window, cooking smells that made it feel like home, photographs covering the walls, documenting Josh's journey from infant to man. Notably absent were any images of Scott. That chapter, Mariana had decided, didn't deserve wall space. Josh visited often, usually bringing groceries, though. Mariana insisted she could buy her own now. "I know you can," he'd say, unpacking bags filled with things she loved, but would never have splurged on herself. "But let me do this. You spent years making sure I was fed. It's my turn." They'd cook together on weekends, falling into comfortable rhythms that felt like muscle memory. Mariana would ask about his week, carefully avoiding questions about dating or settling down. Sensing those topics made him tense. Josh would ask about her garden, her friends, the book club she'd finally had time to join. It was peaceful, these moments. Almost enough to forget the history that had brought them here. Almost, because Josh never forgot. Couldn't forget, even if he'd wanted to. The past lived in his bones, in the careful way his mother still checked prices, despite having money now. In the way Josh found himself hoarding resources he no longer needed to hoard. Trauma, he'd learned, doesn't evaporate just because circumstances improve. It adapts, finding new ways to express itself. His professional circle occasionally overlapped with Scott's world. Inevitably, they'd attend the same conferences, the same charity events, the same industry gatherings. Josh never approached his father at these events. He didn't need to. His presence was message enough. The first time they'd been in the same room since Josh's childhood, the tension had been palpable. Josh had felt Scott's eyes on him across the venue, felt the weight of recognition and calculation. His father was trying to decide whether to acknowledge him, whether ignoring Josh would cost more than acknowledging him. Scott had chosen to ignore him. Josh had expected nothing less. But that moment, watching his father deliberately turn away, watching him laugh with colleagues while pretending his son didn't exist, had crystallized something in Josh's chest. Not anger exactly, something colder. "More patient. You saw him tonight, didn't you?" Mariana had asked when Josh called later, hearing something in his voice. "Yeah, and nothing. He acted like I wasn't there." Mariana had been quiet for a moment. "Does that hurt?" "Not anymore," Josh had lied. "I'm past expecting anything from him. Josh, I'm fine, Mama, really. He's a stranger who happens to share some DNA. That's all he is." But he wasn't all he was. He was also a debt unpaid, an injustice unresolved, a father-shaped hole that had warped Josh's entire childhood. You don't just get past that because you want to. The years continued their forward march. Josh's reputation grew. Mariana aged gracefully, finally able to relax after a lifetime of survival mode. They built a life that looked from the outside like success, but Josh kept that file, kept adding to it, kept watching for the right moment. And then, through a mutual acquaintance, he heard about the wedding. Scott's next grand performance, his next attempt to play the role of successful, beloved family man. Josh had been having coffee with a colleague when she'd mentioned it casually. "Did you hear Scott Remington is getting married again? Supposed to be this huge event. Massive guest list, orchestra, the works." Josh's coffee had suddenly tasted like ash. "Is that so?" "Yeah, he's marrying some woman half his age. Faye something? Holbrook, I think. Pretty girl. Seems sweet, if a bit naive." The colleague had shrugged. "Must be nice to have that kind of money to throw around." "Must be," Josh had agreed neutrally, but inside something had shifted. The patient thing that had been building for years suddenly snapped into sharp focus. This was it, the moment he'd been unconsciously waiting for. That evening he'd driven to his mother's house unannounced, found her in the garden pruning roses in the fading light. "Josh." She'd smiled, pulling off her gardening gloves. "I wasn't expecting you. Is everything okay?" "He's getting married again." The smile had faded. "I heard. Big wedding. Huge production. Playing the happy groom for everyone. Josh, where is this going?" He'd taken a breath, choosing his words carefully. "I think it's time people knew the truth." "What truth?" "All of it. What he did to you, to us. The man he really is when the cameras aren't flashing." Mariana had set down her pruning shears, her expression troubled. "Baby, no. You can't. I can. And I think I should. It'll hurt you more than it hurts him. That's how these things work. Maybe. Or maybe it's time someone stood up and said he doesn't get to rewrite history. He doesn't get to pretend to be something he's not." "Josh, please." Mariana had crossed to him, taking his hands. "Don't do this. Not for me. I've made my peace, but I haven't," Josh had said quietly. "And I don't think I can until there's some kind of accounting. He can't just keep getting away with it." "Getting away with what? Being a bad father? Life isn't fair, Josh. Bad people thrive all the time. Exposing him won't change that. It'll change how I feel about standing by and letting it happen." They'd stood there in the garden as darkness fell, mother and son, locked in an argument with no right answer. Mariana wanted her son to move forward unburdened. Josh wanted his mother to see justice done. "If you do this," Mariana had finally said, "do it because you need to, not because you think I need you to." "I don't need revenge, Josh. I never have." "I know. But maybe I do." She'd studied his face, the face she'd watched grow from infant to boy to man, and seen something that frightened her. Not cruelty. Josh would never be cruel. But determination that bordered on obsession. "Just promise me one thing," she'd said. "Anything. Don't lose yourself in this. Don't become so focused on him that you forget who you are. You're the best thing I ever made, Josh. Don't let him taint that." "I won't," he'd promised, pulling her into a hug. "I'm not doing this to hurt him, Mama. I'm doing it to free us." But as he'd driven home that night, Josh had wondered if that was entirely true. Was this about freedom? Or was it about something darker, something he didn't want to name? The wedding was months away. Josh had that long to decide what kind of man he wanted to be, the one who moved forward in grace, like his mother, or the one who demanded accounting for debts long overdue. In the end, it wasn't really a choice at all. Some debts, Josh believed, had to be paid, and Scott Remington's bill was coming due. Chapter 5. The Second Crown. News traveled fast in circles where money talks louder than truth. The announcement appeared first on social media, because of course it did. Scott Remington's engagement to Faye Holbrook, complete with professional photos of them looking windswept and in love on some scenic coastal cliff. The ring on her finger could probably have funded a small school. The comments section overflowed with congratulations, heart emojis, and the kind of performative excitement that defines modern celebration. Josh saw it while scrolling during his lunch break. His hand had tightened around his phone involuntarily, his jaw clenching hard enough to ache. "You okay?" the coworker had asked, noticing his expression. "Fine," Josh had managed. "Just remembered something I need to handle." He'd left work early that day, driving aimlessly through the city while his thoughts churned. The engagement itself wasn't surprising. Scott collected wives the way some people collected cars. But the timing, the publicity, the sheer audacity of presenting himself as a romantic leading man when he'd abandoned his actual family, it was too much. The careful control Josh had maintained for years felt suddenly fragile. He ended up at his mother's house without consciously deciding to go there. Found her in the living room, knitting something soft and blue. "He proposed," Josh said, without preamble. Mariana looked up, immediately understanding. "I saw. The comments are disgusting. Everyone's congratulating him like he's some kind of prize. People don't know any better." "Josh, they only see what he shows them. That's the problem." Josh paced the room, restless energy needing an outlet. "He controls the narrative. Always has. And we're just supposed to stay quiet and let him. We've built our own narrative," Mariana said gently. A good one. We don't need his validation. This isn't about validation. It's about truth. Mariana set down her knitting, studying her son with worried eyes. What are you planning? I don't know yet, Josh admitted. But I can't watch him play Happy Families again without saying something. Josh, he told her we abandoned him, Mama. I looked into it. That's the story he's been telling. That you were unstable, that you left, that he's been this tragic victim of a bitter ex-wife. Mariana's face paled. How do you know that? I have friends. People who know people. The story's consistent. He's been lying about what happened for years, making himself the hero and you the villain. For the first time, Josh saw anger flash across his mother's face. Real anger, not the carefully managed disappointment she usually allowed herself. He's rewriting history, she said quietly. Exactly. And his new fiancé believes it. Faye Holbrook thinks she's marrying a man who was wronged, who's overcome heartbreak, who deserves this new happiness. Maybe he does deserve happiness. Mama. No doubt Josh knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands. Stop being generous to him. He doesn't deserve your grace. He never did. Tears welled in Mariana's eyes. I don't know how to be anything else, baby. Bitterness would have killed me. Grace kept me alive. I'm not asking you to be bitter. I'm asking you to let me speak truth. He shouldn't get to rewrite what happened. You shouldn't be remembered as the villain in his story. Will the truth change anything? It'll change how I feel about staying silent. They sat there for a long moment, the weight of years pressing down on them both. Finally, Mariana squeezed Josh's hands. If you do this, she said slowly, be careful. Men like Scott don't react well to being exposed. He has resources, connections. So do I now. It's not the same, Josh. He's had years to build walls. You'll be attacking someone who's had time to fortify. I know, but I can't let him win again. Mariana's expression shifted into something sad and resigned. This isn't about winning, is it? This is about that little boy who watched his father drive away without looking back. Josh flinched at the accuracy. Maybe? Oh, baby. Mariana pulled him into a hug, and Josh let himself be held, feeling suddenly young again. I wish I could take that hurt from you. I'd carry it all if I could. You've carried enough, Josh said against her shoulder. It's my turn. Over the following weeks, Josh gathered information methodically. Not through anything illegal or dramatic, just patient research. Public records, old newspaper articles, testimonies from people who'd worked in Scott's household during Josh's childhood. The evidence painted a damning picture. Scott had systematically isolated Mariana during their marriage, controlled her finances, dismissed her friends, belittled her aspirations. Then, when he'd grown bored with the performance, he'd discarded her with the emotional investment of someone throwing out old furniture. The divorce had been weaponized, expensive attorneys ensuring Mariana got nothing. That child support was minimized to the point of insult. That Scott emerged looking like the magnanimous party who tried to make things work. It was textbook financial abuse, documented in legal filings that Scott had assumed would never see daylight. But Josh was bringing them into the light. He compiled everything into a presentation that was thorough, but not theatrical. Facts, not emotion. Dates, not accusations. The kind of evidence that couldn't be dismissed as bitter revenge, because it was simply true. The wedding was approaching fast. Josh watched social media posts tracking the preparations, venue tours, cake tastings, the kind of performative happiness that made his stomach turn. Faye Holbrook posted cheerfully about finally finding the one, about being so blessed, about starting there forever. She had no idea what kind of man she was marrying. Josh tracked down her information, not to contact her, but to understand who she was. Faye was younger than Scott by a significant margin, worked in some creative field that didn't pay well, came from a modest background. In other words, exactly the kind of woman Scott could impress with wealth and false promises. She seems nice, Josh told his mother one evening, showing her Faye's social media. Then maybe you should warn her, Mariana suggested. And say what? Don't marry my father because he's terrible. She'd think I was a bitter ex-son trying to sabotage his happiness. Maybe that's what you are. Josh looked at his mother sharply. You think I'm wrong to do this? I think you're hurt, and hurt people make complicated decisions. I don't think you're wrong to want justice. I just worry about what it'll cost you. It's already cost me a father, Josh said bitterly. What more can I lose? Yourself, Mariana said simply. You can lose yourself in this, Josh. You can become so focused on hurting him that you forget how to be anything else. I'm not trying to hurt him. I'm trying to stop him from hurting anyone else. Noble goal. But revenge dressed up as justice is still revenge. Josh had no response to that. Because maybe she was right. Maybe his motives weren't as pure as he wanted to believe. Maybe there was a part of him, a deep, wounded part, that simply wanted his father to feel something, anything, even if that something was shame. The wedding date crept closer. Josh's resolve solidified. He made his plans carefully, playing scenarios in his head, anticipating reactions, and then, 1 week before the ceremony, Mariana came to him with tears in her eyes. "Don't go," she begged. "Please, Josh, for me, don't go. Mama, I know what you're planning. I can see it in you. You're going to that wedding to expose him, to make a scene, to force him to face what he did. He deserves to face it. Maybe, but you deserve peace more than you deserve revenge." She gripped his arms, desperate. "Let it go, baby, please. Let him have his wedding and his lies. We have our truth. That's enough. It's not enough for me. Then what will be? What will satisfy this need in you? Will watching him be humiliated fix the years we struggled? Will it give you back the childhood he stole? No, Josh admitted. But it'll give you back your reputation. It'll make sure people know you weren't the villain. I don't care what people think. Well, I do." The words burst out of Josh with unexpected force. "I care that he gets to live his life pretending to be decent while you're just erased. I care that everyone believes his lies. I care that he never paid for what he did, and this will make him pay. It's a start." Mariana looked at her son, this man she'd raised alone, this person she'd tried so hard to keep from being damaged by his father's absence, and saw that she'd lost this battle. Whatever was going to happen would happen regardless of her wishes. "Then promise me something," she said quietly. "What? Don't do anything violent. Don't hurt anyone. Don't break any laws. If you're going to do this, do it with words and truth, not with anything that could destroy you." "I promise," Josh said, and meant it. He didn't want to hurt anyone. He just wanted his father to finally see him. Mariana nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Then I can't stop you, but I'm coming with you." "What?" "No, Mama, if you're going to face him, you're not doing it alone. I let you face too much alone when you were growing up." "Not anymore," Josh had argued, but Mariana was immovable. If her son was walking into fire, she'd be there to pull him out if necessary. The wedding was days away. Scott Remington had no idea his past was about to collide with his present in front of hundreds of witnesses. And Josh, despite his mother's warnings, despite his own doubts, felt something like relief. The waiting was almost over. The reckoning was finally at hand. Chapter 6. The Uninvited Reckoning. The Remington estate glittered like a lie wrapped in crystal. Josh stood in the parking area, staring at the venue his father had chosen for this latest performance. It was everything Scott would want. Ostentatious enough to impress, expensive enough to intimidate, beautiful enough to photograph well. White tents billowed in the manicured garden. Caterers moved with practiced efficiency. An orchestra tuned instruments somewhere inside. Money, Josh thought grimly. Goodbye anything except integrity. We don't have to do this. A Mariana said beside him, her voice tight with tension. "Yes, we do, Josh. Mama, if you don't want to come inside, I understand. But I'm going in." Mariana looked at her son, really looked at him. He wore a suit she'd helped him pick out, tailored and sharp, the kind of clothes that announced success without shouting it. He'd grown into such a powerful presence, her boy. Strong jaw, direct gaze, shoulders that carried weight without bending. He looked, she realized with a pang, nothing like his father. Thank goodness for that. I'm coming with you, she decided. But Josh, please think about what happens after. This moment will end, but you'll have to live with whatever you do here. I've been living with what he did for years, Josh replied. It's his turn. They walked toward the entrance together. The closer they got, the more Josh felt time doing strange things, expanding and contracting, making each step feel both endless and too fast. His heart hammered against his ribs, adrenaline flooding his system. At the entrance, a woman with a clipboard smiled professionally. Good afternoon. May I have your names? We're not on the list, Josh said calmly. The smile faltered. Oh, I'm sorry, but this is a private event. I know. I'm the groom's son. The words hung in the perfumed air like a grenade with the pin pulled. The woman's eyes went wide, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to process this information. I'll need to check with... No need, Josh said, already moving past her. We'll announce ourselves. Sir, you can't... But they were already through, entering the main ceremony hall where hundreds of guests had gathered to witness Scott Remington's next triumph. The space was decorated within an inch of its life, flowers cascading from every surface, crystal catching the light, everything white and gold and deliberately perfect. Josh and Mariana stood at the back of the hall as the ceremony began. No one had noticed them yet. All eyes focused on the altar where Scott stood in his expensive tuxedo, looking every inch the distinguished groom. Faye was approaching down the aisle, radiant in her dress, believing with her whole heart that she was walking toward happiness. Josh felt something twist in his chest. She really didn't know. This woman about to pledge her life to his father had no idea what kind of man waited for her at the altar. The officiant began speaking, voice sonorous with practiced gravity. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Scott and Faye. Josh waited. Timing mattered. He needed the moment when everyone was paying attention, when interruption would have maximum impact. The officiant continued. If anyone knows of any lawful impediment why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace. That was his opening. Josh's voice cut through the hall, clear and unwavering. I object. The effect was instantaneous and electric. Heads whipped around. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Faye froze halfway through, turning to face Scott. And Scott went absolutely white, all color draining from his face as he recognized the voice. Then he saw Josh, and for just a second, his carefully constructed mask cracked completely. Fear, that's what Josh saw. Raw animal fear. Who is that? Someone whispered loudly. Is that his son? Another voice replied. I didn't know he had a son. The whispers built quickly, spreading like fire through dry grass. Josh walked forward slowly, deliberately giving people time to see him, to mark this moment. Mariana followed a step behind, her head held high despite her trembling hands. Josh. Scott's voice cracked on the name, like he couldn't quite believe this was happening. What are you doing here? What I should have done years ago, Josh replied, reaching the front of the hall. Telling the truth. This is my wedding, your third, fourth? I've lost count. Though I understand why you might have trouble keeping track of wives when you don't bother keeping track of your children either. Faye looked between them, confusion written across her face. Scott, what is he talking about? Nothing, Scott said quickly. This is just, he's confused. I'm your son, Josh said to Faye directly. The one he abandoned when I was an infant. The one he's never paid child support for. The one whose existence he's been lying about for years. That's not, Scott started, but his denial died in his throat under Josh's steady gaze. Is this true? Faye turned to Scott, wedding bouquet trembling in her hands. You have a son. It's complicated. It's not complicated at all, Josh interrupted. It's actually very simple. He married my mother, Josh gestured to Mariana, treated her terribly, divorced her without cause. Abandoned both of us completely, and has spent the years since pretending it never happened. The hall was dead silent now, every person frozen, watching this family drama unfold like witnesses to a car crash. Several guests had their phones out recording. Josh noted this with grim satisfaction. Let them record. Let the truth spread. Scott's face had gone from white to red, anger overtaking fear. You have no right to be here. This is a private ceremony. You had no right to erase us from your life, Josh shot back. But you did it anyway. And now, everyone here gets to know exactly who you are. Get out, Scott snarled. Both of you. Before I have security remove you, by all means call security, Josh said calmly. Let's make this even more of a scene. I'm sure your guests would love that. I'm sure Faye would really appreciate you having your son forcibly removed from your wedding. Faye had backed away from both of them, her face pale with dawning horror. Scott, is he telling the truth? Faye, let me explain. Is he telling the truth? Scott opened his mouth, closed it, struggled visibly with what to say, and in that hesitation, Faye found her answer. Oh my God, she whispered. You lied to me. About everything. I didn't lie. I just didn't mention you told me your first wife left you. Faye's voice rose, carrying across the silent hall. You said she was unstable, that she abandoned you, that you'd been trying to find peace ever since. That was all lies? Josh pulled papers from his jacket, the evidence he'd compiled so carefully. He told lots of lies. Would you like to hear the truth? Don't you dare, Scott hissed, taking a step toward Josh. Josh didn't back down. They stood eye to eye, father and son, separated by years of silence and mountains of hurt. You abandoned the woman who made you, Josh said quietly, but in the frozen silence, everyone heard. You abandoned me, and today you're going to face what you did, all of it, in front of everyone. Scott's hands clenched into fists, his jaw working as he fought for control. You self-righteous little— Don't! Mariana said sharply, speaking for the first time. Every eye turned to her. Don't you dare call him anything. He's worth 10 of you, always has been. Scott stared at his ex-wife, seeing her for the first time in years. Mariana, Scott, she replied coolly. Still good at playing the victim, I see. This is insane, Scott said, looking around at his guests as if appealing for support. This is my wedding day, my wedding. And they burst in here making accusations. Not accusations, Josh corrected. Facts. Would you like me to present them? I have documentation, testimony, evidence of every promise you broke, every payment you missed, every lie you told. The hall remained frozen, hundreds of people holding their collective breath. Scott's carefully constructed empire was crumbling in real time, and everyone was watching it happen. And then Scott made his final mistake. He reached for Josh, whether to shove him or simply to make him leave. But the gesture was aggressive enough that several guests gasped. Josh didn't move, didn't flinch, just looked at his father with eyes that held no fear. Don't touch me, Josh said softly. You gave up that right the day you walked away. Scott's hand dropped, and in that moment, everyone in the hall understood the truth. This wasn't about a bitter son seeking revenge. This was about a man who'd caused real damage finally facing the consequences. The reckoning had begun, and it was only going to get worse for Scott Remington. Chapter 7. The Unraveling. Fear, Josh discovered, had a smell, and his father reeked of it. The silence that followed Josh's words was so complete that the sound of Faye's bouquet hitting the floor echoed like a gunshot. White roses scattered across the polished marble, petals bruising against the cold surface. No one moved to pick them up. Scott stood frozen, his hand still extended from his aborted attempt to push Josh away. His face cycled through expressions, rage, panic, calculation, settling finally on something close to desperation. He'd built his entire life on carefully managed appearances, and now his son was demolishing that construction in front of his whole social circle. The officiant cleared his throat awkwardly. Perhaps we should take a moment? No, Josh said firmly. We're not taking a moment. We're not pausing so he can spin this into something it's not. Everyone here came to celebrate a marriage. They should know who they're celebrating. Josh, please. It was Faye who spoke, her voice thin and breaking. Can we talk about this privately? He's had years to talk privately, Josh replied, not unkindly. Privacy is what let him rewrite history. I'm done protecting his reputation. I'm not asking for him, Faye said, tears beginning to stream down her carefully made-up face. I'm asking for me. This is supposed to be my wedding day, and— Her voice broke completely. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, torn between their desire to watch the drama unfold and their sympathy for the bride caught in the crossfire. Mariana moved forward, extending a hand toward Faye with genuine compassion. "I'm sorry you're learning this way, dear. I truly am. But you needed to know before it was too late." "Stay away from her," Scott snapped, stepping between Faye and Mariana. "You've done enough damage." "I've done damage?" Mariana's voice, usually so gentle, turned sharp as broken glass. "Scott Remington, you have the audacity to stand there and pretend I'm the problem. After what you did, after how you treated us, I gave you everything. You gave us nothing." For the first time in years, maybe ever, Mariana let her anger show. "You took me from my life, isolated me in that house, made me feel small every single day, and then threw me away like garbage when you got bored. And our son, you never even tried, never called, never sent support, never checked if he was alive or hungry or safe. That's not how it happened." "Then tell us how it happened," Josh challenged. "Go ahead, tell everyone here your version. Tell them why you left. Tell them why you never paid child support. Tell them why you've been lying to Faye about your past." Scott's mouth opened and closed. His expensive attorney instincts warred with his desperate need to salvage the situation. In the end, he did what he'd always done. He tried to deflect. "You want to know why I left?" He laughed bitter and harsh. "Because your mother was impossible. Nothing I did was good enough. She was always upset about something, always making demands. I asked you to treat me like a person," Mariana interrupted quietly. "That was my only demand. You asked for everything. My time, my attention, your basic human decency," she finished. "And apparently that was too much." Josh pulled the folder from his jacket again, the documentation he'd compiled over months. "We don't need to debate his memory versus ours. We have facts." He opened the folder, extracting papers. "This is the divorce settlement. Note the date, right after Josh was born. Note the child support amount, calculated to be the absolute minimum legally possible. Note that according to payment records, only a handful of payments were ever made. Ever, in all these years." He handed papers to the nearest guests, who took them with shocked fascination. The documents began circulating through the crowd like contraband. "This," Josh continued, pulling more evidence, "is testimony from people who worked in your house during my parents' marriage. Would you like me to read what they said about how you treated my mother? This is slander. It's notarized testimony. Public record. I didn't create it, I just compiled it." Josh's voice remained level, prosecutorial. "Nenai tidushua sisetakasos." You isolated her, criticized her constantly, made her afraid to speak in her own home. And when she finally signed those divorce papers, you made sure she left with nothing. She got what she was entitled to. She was entitled to respect." Josh's composure finally cracked, passion bleeding through. "She was your wife, the mother of your child, and you treated her like she was disposable." Faye had sunk onto a nearby chair, her wedding dress pooling around her like a deflated cloud. "You told me she left you," she said to Scott, voice hollow. "You said she was unstable, that she took your money and disappeared, that you'd tried to find her." Scott turned to her, desperate now. "Faye, you have to understand, it's more complicated than was any of it true." She looked up at him, mascara tracking down her face. "Anything you told me about your past? About your previous marriage? About who you are? I am who I've shown you. You're a liar." The words came out flat, factual. "I almost married a liar." "Everyone lies about their exes," Scott tried, his voice taking on a pleading quality Josh had never heard before. "You're telling me you've never put a spin on past relationships? There's a difference between spin and complete fabrication." Faye stood, shakily, gathering the ruins of her dignity. "You have a son you never mentioned, an ex-wife you slandered, a history of abuse." "I never abused anyone. Financial abuse is real abuse," Josh interjected. "Emotional abuse is real abuse. Just because you didn't hit her doesn't mean you didn't hurt her." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Several of Scott's business associates looked uncomfortable, probably calculating how this revelation would affect their professional relationships with him. Social connections were being severed in real time, alliances reconsidered. Scott seemed to realize he was losing on every front. His face hardened, anger overtaking desperation. "Fine," he spat. "You want the truth? The truth is, I was young and stupid when I married your mother. I thought I wanted a family, but I was wrong. So I corrected my mistake. That's called growth. Moving on, that's called abandonment," Josh corrected coldly. "You didn't just leave a marriage. You abandoned your child. That's not growth. That's cowardice. I had no obligation. You had every obligation." Josh's voice rose. "You brought me into this world. You made me. And then you just left. Like I meant nothing. Like my whole existence was inconvenient to you." For the first time, emotion cracked through Josh's prosecutorial calm. Years of buried hurt surfaced, raw and painful. "Do you know what it's like growing up knowing your father didn't want you? Watching my mother work herself to exhaustion because you couldn't be bothered to send a check. Seeing other kids with their dads and wondering what I did wrong to make mine leave." "Josh," Mariana said softly, reaching for her son. But Josh couldn't stop now. The words poured out like blood from a wound finally opened. "I was a good kid. I got good grades. I stayed out of trouble. I did everything right. And still you didn't care. You didn't call. You didn't visit. You didn't even acknowledge I existed." His voice broke. "What kind of man does that? What kind of father just stops?" The hall was silent, except for the sound of several guests crying quietly. Even Scott's most loyal friends looked uncomfortable, unable to defend the indefensible. Scott's face had gone rigid, every muscle tight. "I'm not going to be lectured by—" "Then don't let me lecture you," Josh interrupted, regaining control. "Let the evidence speak." He began reading testimony aloud. Words from former housekeepers describing how Scott treated Mariana. Statements from neighbors who'd heard arguments. Documentation of financial manipulation. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of Scott's reputation. The guests listened in horrified fascination. This was better than any television drama. This was real, messy, devastating. Faye had backed toward the exit, her hand over her mouth. "I can't. I need to leave. I need air." She fled, her wedding dress trailing behind her like a flag of surrender. Several bridesmaids hurried after her, shooting disgusted looks at Scott as they passed. Scott watched his bride flee, and something in him seemed to collapse. "Happy now?" he asked Josh bitterly.
"You've ruined my wedding."
"Destroyed my reputation. What else do you want?" "I want you to feel something," Josh said quietly. "Anything, remorse, guilt, shame. Some evidence that you understand what you did wrong." "I didn't do anything wrong." "Then we're done here," Josh said flatly. "If you can stand here, surrounded by evidence of your cruelty, and still claim innocence, then you're beyond redemption." He turned to leave, taking his mother's arm. But as they reached the aisle, Scott called out, "You think you're better than me? You think this makes you righteous?" His voice dripped with venom. "You're just a bitter son who can't let go of the past." Josh stopped, turned back slowly. "No," he said clearly. "I'm the son you abandoned. There's a difference." And then he raised his hand. Chapter 8, The Evidence of Cruelty. Truth is patient. It waits in documents, in testimonies, in wounds that never quite heal. But Josh didn't swing, not yet. His hand was raised, trembling with years of suppressed rage, but he held it there, suspended between justice and vengeance, between righteousness and violence. Every eye in the hall tracked that raised hand, waiting to see which choice he'd make. Scott flinched backward, a genuine cringe that revealed more about his character than any testimony could. Here was a man who'd brutalized others emotionally for years, yet cowered at the threat of physical confrontation. Josh slowly lowered his hand. "No," he said quietly, "I'm not giving you that. You don't get to be the victim here." He reached into his folder again, extracting the heaviest evidence, the documents he'd been saving for this exact moment. "This," Josh said, holding up bank statements, "shows your actual net worth at the time of the divorce. And this," he held up the divorce settlement, "shows what you claim to be worth. Notice the difference? You hid assets. You'd lied under oath to make sure my mother got nothing. He passed the documents to the nearest guests. They circulated quickly, people's expressions shifting from shock to disgust as they absorbed the numbers. "This," Josh continued, pulling more papers, "is medical documentation from my childhood. Hospital visits my mother paid for alone, illnesses, broken bones from accidents. Every single one with a notation that the father was contacted and declined to assist. A woman in the crowd gasped audibly. He refused to help with medical bills for his own child? Every time," Josh confirmed. "Because actually paying child support would have required him to acknowledge I existed." More papers circulated. The crowd's energy was shifting from shocked spectators to active participants in Scott's judgment. People were muttering to each other, comparing documents, connecting dots. Here's testimony from Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield, who worked as a housekeeper in his home during my parents' marriage. Josh read from the notarized statement. Mr. Remington regularly berated his wife in front of staff. He controlled her spending, monitored her phone calls, and forbade her from seeing friends without his explicit permission. On multiple occasions, I witnessed him destroying possessions she valued, books, photos, small items, as punishment for perceived slights. That's not, Scott started. But Josh cut him off. Mrs. Whitfield worked for you for years. She has no reason to lie. And she's not the only one. He pulled another document. Here's testimony from Bernard Hayes, your former driver. Should I read what he said about the night you threw my mother out? Scott's face had gone ashen. You can't, this is private. You made it private by making sure no one knew the truth. I'm making it public. Josh turned to the assembled guests. Bernard states that Mr. Remington called him late at night, instructed him to take Mrs. Remington and their infant son to a motel across town, and told him to make sure she understands she's not welcome back. This was before divorce papers were filed. Before any legal proceedings. He just threw us out. Mariana was crying now, quiet tears streaming down her face. Not from shame, she'd lived through this, survived it, but from the pain of remembering. Josh moved closer to her instinctively, protective. Stop it, one of Scott's groomsmen called out. This is cruel. She doesn't need to relive this. She lived it alone the first time, Josh replied. Maybe it's time other people understood what she survived. He wasn't done. He pulled photographs next, images Mariana had kept, hidden away in a box she'd never shown Josh until recently. These are from their marriage. Look at the progression. He held up photos chronologically. Here's my mother on their wedding day. See her smile? The light in her eyes. He switched photos. This is 1 year later. Notice the difference? The way she's standing slightly behind him. The way her smile doesn't reach her eyes. Another photo. 2 years. She's thinner, shoulders curved inward. Classic body language of someone trying to make themselves smaller. The guests were leaning forward now, studying the images as they circulated. The visual evidence was damning, watching a vibrant woman slowly diminish under the weight of mistreatment. And this, Josh said, voice thick with emotion, is from the week after their divorce. Look at her face. That's what freedom looks like when you've been trapped. In the photo, Mariana looked exhausted, but somehow lighter. The tension had left her shoulders. Her eyes, though tired, held hope. One of the female guests spoke up, her voice shaking. I know those expressions. I've seen them in my mirror. She turned to Scott with open contempt. You broke her. I did no such thing. You absolutely did. The woman continued, standing now. I'm leaving. I won't be part of celebrating this man. She walked out. Several others followed. The exodus had begun. Scott watched his social circle fracture in real time, desperation creeping into his eyes. Everyone, please, this is being blown out of proportion. Divorces are messy. People misremember. People don't misremember bank records, someone called out. The numbers don't lie. And testimony from multiple independent sources all saying the same thing. That's not misremembering. That's a pattern. Another guest added. Josh pulled his final piece of evidence, the most damaging of all. This is a letter you wrote to your attorney during the divorce proceedings. Would you like me to read the relevant section? Scott's face went white. Where did you get that? That's privileged. Your attorney's office had a data breach years ago. Lots of old files ended up in public records before they realized. This was one of them. Josh began reading. I don't care what she needs. Make this cheap and fast. She brought nothing to this marriage and deserves nothing going out. The kid was her choice. I never wanted children. Make sure the support is minimal and that I have no contact requirements. I'm done with this chapter. The hall erupted. Voices overlapping, people shouting in disgust, Scott's name being cursed openly. You told your attorney you never wanted me, Josh said, his voice cutting through the noise. Before I was even walking, you'd written me off completely. The kid was her choice, you said. Like I was a car she'd bought without consulting you. Scott had no response. What could he say? His own words condemned him more thoroughly than anything Josh could add. Faye had returned to the doorway during this exchange, apparently unable to stay away despite wanting to flee. She'd heard the letter reading, heard the crowd's reaction. You told me you wanted children, she said to Scott, her voice dead. You said you regretted not having a family. You said this time would be different. Faye, I've changed. People don't change that much, she said flatly. They just get better at hiding who they are. And you almost had me completely fooled. She looked at Josh and Mariana. Thank you. I mean that. Thank you for saving me from making the biggest mistake of my life. Josh nodded respectfully. I'm sorry it had to be this way. Don't be. Better now than after I'd signed papers giving him legal rights to my life. She began pulling off her veil, her engagement ring. Consider this wedding cancelled. She dropped the ring on the floor, a small clink of expensive metal hitting marble, and walked out for the final time. This time, she didn't look back. Scott stared at the ring on the floor, and for the first time, genuine emotion crossed his face. Not guilt, not remorse, just the hollow realization that he'd lost something valuable. You've destroyed everything, he said to Josh. No, Josh corrected. I've revealed everything. You destroyed it years ago. I'm just making sure people know. The hall was emptying rapidly now. Guests fleeing this catastrophe, probably already texting others about what they'd witnessed. By tomorrow, everyone in their social circle would know. Scott's reputation was finished. Only a handful of people remained, mostly those too shocked to move, or those who'd pulled out phones to continue documenting. Scott looked around at the ruins of his wedding, at the scattered roses and empty chairs, at the son he'd abandoned now standing in judgment. What do you want from me? He asked, and for the first time he sounded genuinely broken. What will make you stop? Josh considered the question. What did he want? An apology wouldn't undo the years. Money wouldn't heal the wounds. Acknowledgement wouldn't give him back his childhood. I want you to feel what you did, Josh said finally. Just once, I want you to understand what it cost us. The fear, the shame, the poverty, the wondering why we weren't worth staying for. I can't change the past. No, but you could have changed the present at any time. You could have reached out, made amends, tried, but you chose comfort over conscience. Again and again you chose yourself. Scott had no answer. The truth was too stark to deny. Josh turned to his mother. Ready to go, Mama? Mariana nodded, taking his arm. They walked together toward the exit, leaving Scott standing alone at his own wedding, surrounded by evidence of his cruelty and the ruins of his reputation. But as they reached the door, Josh paused. There was one more thing, one final action that would mark this moment permanently. He turned back to face his father, and slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand again. This time, he wouldn't hold back. Chapter 9. The Bride's Awakening. Faye Holbrook had thought she knew the man she was marrying. She'd been catastrophically wrong. The slap hadn't landed yet. Josh's hand was still raised, time seeming to stretch like taffy as everyone processed what was about to happen. Mariana's grip on Josh's other arm tightened, not pulling him back. Exactly, but anchoring him to the moment. To the choice he was making, Josh, she said softly. Not a command. Just his name. He looked at his mother briefly, seeing the concern in her eyes. Not judgment, she'd never judge him, not for this. But worry. Worry that this action, this final blow, might cost him something precious. Might transform him into something he didn't want to become. Josh lowered his hand again. No, he repeated. You're still not worth it. But Faye's voice cut through the tension before Scott could respond. She had moved back into the room, no longer fleeing, but standing with rigid composure. Her wedding dress incongruous with the steel in her spine. I need to understand something, she said, addressing everyone but looking at Scott. How long were we together? How many months did we date, get engaged, plan this wedding? Scott's face was cautious. Over a year, she repeated. And in all that time, not once did you mention you had a son. An ex-wife you'd abandoned? A whole family you'd erased? I didn't think it was relevant. Not relevant? Her voice cracked like a whip. You let me fall in love with a fiction. You let me plan a life with someone who doesn't even exist. I am who I showed you. You're a performer, she cut him off. Everything about you is curated, managed, designed to present exactly what people want to see. But what happens when the performance is over, Scott? What happens when you get bored with me, the way you got bored with her? She gestured to Mariana. That was different. How? How was it different? What makes me special enough that you wouldn't do the same thing? Scott opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No answer came. That's what I thought, Faye said bitterly. She turned to Mariana, and her expression shifted from anger to something like recognition. How did you survive it, being married to him? Mariana seemed surprised to be addressed directly. I don't know. I just did. You find strength you didn't know you had when leaving isn't an option. Did you love him at the beginning? Desperately, Mariana admitted. I believed every promise he made, every beautiful lie. And when did you realize that he didn't love me back? Mariana's smile was sad. Too late. By then, we had a child, and I'd convinced myself I could make it work through enough effort, enough sacrifice, enough changing myself into what he wanted. Did it work? Obviously not. You can't love someone into loving you back. All you can do is destroy yourself trying. Faye nodded slowly, absorbing this. He told me you were mentally unstable, that you'd had postpartum depression and used it to manipulate him emotionally. Gasps from the remaining guests. That accusation, weaponizing mental health, was particularly vile. Mariana's face went hard. I did have postpartum depression. New mothers often do. But I never used it to manipulate anyone. I went to therapy. I worked through it. I took care of my child despite being completely alone and struggling with my mental health. He took the most vulnerable time in my life and turned it into ammunition. He told me you took money from him and disappeared. He gave me nothing. I left with 2 suitcases and our son. Everything I have now, Josh gave me after years of us barely surviving. Faye looked at Josh with new understanding. You took care of her. She took care of me first, Josh replied. I just returned the favor. How old were you when you started working? Still in school. Old enough to know she needed help, too young to provide it properly. While your father... She turned back to Scott, the question implicit. While I lived in a mansion and pretended I didn't have a son, Scott said flatly, apparently abandoning any pretense. That's what you want me to say, right? That I'm a monster? Fine, I'm a monster. Don't do that, Faye snapped. Don't play the martyr now. That's not what this is. Then what is this? This is me understanding who I almost legally bound my life to. She began pulling off her wedding dress, not completely, but enough to step out of the massive skirt portion, standing there in what looked like an undergarment slip. This dress cost more than some people make in a year. Did you know that? I know how much I paid. You paid for me to play dress-up in a fairy tale wedding to a man who sees women as disposable accessories. She kicked the dress aside. I almost did it. I almost signed my life away to someone who would have discarded me the moment I stopped being convenient. One of the remaining guests, an older woman, spoke up. Hey, dear, maybe you should step outside. Get some air. Process this privately. Why? Faye turned to her. So we can all pretend this didn't happen? So Scott can control the narrative afterward? No. I'm processing it right here in front of everyone, so there's no confusion about what happened and why. She faced Scott directly. You made me believe I was special, that our connection was unique. that your past relationships failed because those women didn't understand you. But the truth is, you're incapable of real connection. You're just good at faking it long enough to trap people. That's not fair. What's not fair is letting me find this out after the wedding instead of before. So thank you, she said to Josh and Mariana. Genuinely. Thank you for being brave enough to do this publicly. I know it cost you, Josh nodded, accepting her gratitude. Faye turned to the remaining guests. For anyone wondering, I'm filing a report with the State Bar about his attorney's role in helping him hide assets during his divorce. And I'm contacting journalists who cover financial crimes because what he did, hiding money to avoid supporting his child, that's fraud. You can't, Scott started, panic creeping back into his voice. Watch me, Faye's voice was ice. You thought I was some naive woman you could manipulate? I work in investigative journalism. This is literally my job, exposing people who abuse power. You just gave me the story of the year. The color drained from Scott's face completely. Faye, please what? Please don't tell people the truth? Please protect your reputation? Please prioritize your comfort over justice? She laughed, harsh and humorless. You picked the wrong woman to try this with. She gathered the remains of her dress, holding the expensive fabric like it was contaminated. This wedding is over. The marriage is never happening, and by tomorrow, everyone in our industry will know exactly who Scott Remington really is. She walked toward the exit with her head high, pausing next to Mariana. If you need someone to testify, someone to corroborate your story publicly, I will. I'll burn whatever's left of his reputation to the ground if it helps. I appreciate that, Mariana said softly. But I think he's burning just fine on his own. Faye smiled, genuine warmth breaking through her anger. Still, the offer stands. She left, and with her went the last pretense that this wedding would somehow recover. The orchestra had long since packed up. The caterers were whispering among themselves, probably wondering if they'd still be paid. The remaining guests were documenting everything on their phones, creating a record that would outlive Scott's attempts to spin this. Scott stood alone at his own altar, surrounded by the ruins of his latest performance. His expensive tuxedo suddenly looked like a costume. His perfectly styled hair seemed ridiculous. Everything about him, the trappings of wealth, the veneer of sophistication, looked hollow now that the truth had been exposed. Satisfied? He asked Josh, his voice empty. Not really, Josh admitted. This doesn't undo anything, doesn't give us back the years, doesn't heal the wounds. Then why do it? Because someone had to. Because letting you keep getting away with it felt worse than exposing you. Scott laughed, a broken, desperate sound. You think this changes anything? You think people will care about this tomorrow? In a week, in a month? I think your next engagement will do research, Josh replied. I think future employers will search your name and find today's story. I think your legacy just became about abandonment and cruelty instead of whatever you thought you were building. Legacy, Scott scoffed. Who cares about legacy? You do. That's why this hurts. The truth of it landed visibly. Scott did care about legacy, about how he'd be remembered, about the story told after he was gone. And Josh had just rewritten that story permanently. Scott started. What? Sue me for telling the truth? For showing people documents you created? Josh shook his head. You have no power here. Not anymore. Mariana had been silent through most of this, but now she spoke, her voice carrying unexpected gentleness. Scott, I hope someday you understand what you lost. Not me. I'm better off without you. Not your money or your reputation. But the chance to know your son, the chance to be part of his life, to watch him grow into someone extraordinary. That's what you threw away. And that loss is yours to carry. Scott looked at her, really looked at her, and for just a moment something like genuine regret flickered across his face. But then it was gone, replaced by his default armor of indifference. I don't need your pity, he said. It's not pity, Mariana replied. It's just sadness. Sadness that you're so broken, you can't even recognize what you destroyed. She took Josh's arm again. Come on, baby. We're done here. They walked toward the exit together. leaving Scott standing in his empty wedding venue, surrounded by evidence of his failures and the ghost of the man he might have been if he'd chosen better. But Josh paused at the threshold one final time, turned back, and this time, with his mother at his side and his purpose clear, he didn't hesitate. His hand came forward, not in a punch, but in the slap heard around the room. Chapter 10. The slap heard around the room. Some sounds echo forever. The crack of Josh's palm across his father's face was one of them. The impact wasn't about force. Josh wasn't trying to injure, wasn't channeling rage into violence. The slap was symbolic, a physical manifestation of every boundary his father had crossed, every promise broken, every year of pretending Josh didn't exist. Scott's head snapped to the side, more from shock than impact. The sound, sharp, unmistakable, froze everyone in place. For several heartbeats, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then the hall erupted. Some people gasped in horror. Others began clapping, slowly at first, then building into genuine applause. Voices called out support. About time. He deserved that. Good for you, son. Josh lowered his hand, flexing his fingers. He felt no satisfaction, no rush of vindication. Just a quiet sense of completion, like closing a book that should have ended chapters ago. Scott's hand went to his reddening cheek, his eyes wide with disbelief. For the first time in perhaps his entire life, he was speechless. The mask had shattered completely, leaving only the small, frightened man beneath. That, Josh said quietly, his voice carrying in the sudden hush, was for every birthday you missed, every call you never made, every moment you chose comfort over responsibility. Scott's mouth worked, trying to form words, but nothing came. I didn't do this to hurt you, Josh continued. Honestly, I don't think you're capable of the kind of hurt you've caused others. I did this so everyone here would know the truth. So the next woman you try to charm, the next family you try to build, they'll have the information to make real choices. You've ruined me. Well, Scott finally managed, his voice hoarse. No, I've exposed you. You ruined yourself years ago. Mariana stepped forward, and Josh thought she might stop him, might counsel forgiveness one more time. But instead, she looked at Scott with an expression of profound finality. I forgive you, she said simply. Not for you, you don't deserve my forgiveness. But for me, because I'm tired of carrying this weight. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean what you did was acceptable. It just means I'm choosing peace over anger. She turned to the remaining guests. For anyone wondering, I never wanted this. Never wanted public confrontation or revenge. But my son needed to do this. Needed to stand up for both of us. And I'm proud of him for having the courage I never had. One of the older women in attendance spoke up, her voice trembling with emotion. I raised children alone after their father left. Everything you described, the struggle, the sacrifice, the wondering why you weren't enough, I lived that too. You're not alone in this, dear. And your boy did good today. Other voices joined, sharing similar stories. The room transformed from Scott's wedding venue into an impromptu support group for survivors of abandonment. Person after person spoke up, validating Mariana's experience, condemning Scott's actions. Scott stood silent through all of it, his face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. Shame, anger, self-pity, defensiveness. He opened his mouth several times as if to argue, but seemed to realize any words would only make things worse. The remaining guests began filing out, some stopping to shake Josh's hand, others hugging Mariana. Scott's groomsmen left without saying goodbye. His family members, the few who'd attended, slipped away quietly, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Soon, only Josh, Mariana, and Scott remained in the cavernous hall. The decorations looked absurd now, like props from a play that had been cancelled mid-performance. Josh took his mother's hand. Let's go home, Mama. They walked toward the exit together. As they reached the door, Scott's voice stopped them one final time. Josh. His voice was barely above a whisper. Son, don't call me that. Josh didn't turn around. You gave up the right to call me your son when I was too young to remember you. We're not family. We're just two people who share DNA and nothing else. I'm sorry, the words hung in the air. Josh paused, considering whether to respond. Finally, he turned back. You know what's sad? Josh said, I actually believe you. But sorry doesn't rebuild years. It doesn't undo damage. It's just a word you're saying because you finally face consequences. He and Mariana walked out into the daylight, leaving Scott surrounded by his expensive decorations and shattered reputation. The sun felt cleansing after the stifling atmosphere inside. As they drove away, Mariana squeezed her son's hand. You gave me something he could never take, my honor restored. Josh smiled, the first genuine smile since this whole ordeal began. We gave each other that, Mama. You showed me how to be strong without being cruel. I just made sure people knew the truth. Do you feel better? I feel lighter, like I've been carrying something heavy for so long I forgot it was there. And now it's gone. Good, because you deserve to be free of him. We both do. They drove to Mariana's house in comfortable silence. When they arrived, she turned to him. No regrets? Josh thought about the question honestly. The confrontation, the evidence, the public humiliation, the slap, no regrets, he confirmed. He needed to be held accountable. And maybe I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't powerless anymore. You were never powerless, baby. You just didn't know it yet. She hugged him tightly. And Josh held his mother, this woman who'd sacrificed everything, who'd kept Grace when bitterness would have been easier, who'd raised him to be strong without being cruel. Over the following days, the story spread like wildfire. Social media exploded with accounts from wedding guests. Faye's article appeared, meticulously documented and devastating. Photos circulated. Scott's face during the confrontation, the slap captured from multiple angles. The bride fleeing in her dress. Scott Remington's name became synonymous with abandonment and consequences. Josh's phone buzzed constantly with interview requests, but he declined most. This hadn't been about fame. It had been about truth, but he did agree to one podcast focused on family healing. Not to talk about revenge, but about resilience. About how children of abandonment could build lives despite the wounds. The real story isn't about the confrontation, Josh said during the recording. It's about survival. About a woman who kept her dignity when it would have been easier to become bitter. About building something good from terrible circumstances. The episode resonated deeply, shared thousands of times, spawning conversations about single parenthood and the long-term effects of parental neglect. Weeks passed. Scott's social invitations dried up. His attempts to date were complicated by women who searched his name and found the articles. He hired reputation management companies, issued statements through lawyers, tried to reframe the narrative, but some stories once told can't be untold. Josh and Mariana moved forward with their lives closer than ever. They planted a garden together that spring, literally and metaphorically cultivating growth from barren ground. Do you think we'll ever hear from him again? Mariana asked one afternoon while pruning roses. Maybe. Probably not. Does it matter? Not really. We're complete without him. We always were. Josh watched his mother work the soil with practiced hands. She'd survived so much, endured so much, and emerged with Grace intact. You know what the best revenge is? Josh asked. What's that, baby? This, us, building a life so good that his absence doesn't define us. Proving that we didn't just survive, we thrived. Mariana looked at her son, at the man he'd become, and felt profound gratitude. Not for the struggle. She'd never thank Scott for the pain he'd caused. But for this moment, this life, this proof that love and determination could overcome almost anything. We did good, didn't we? We did great, Josh corrected. And we did it together. As they drove away from the venue that day, leaving Scott in the wreckage of his choices, they'd proven something important. True victory doesn't wear a crown. It doesn't require wealth or status or revenge. True victory walks out the door with dignity intact, hand in hand with the people who stood by you when standing required everything. It's measured not in moments of confrontation, but in years of quiet perseverance. in a mother's unwavering love and a son's fierce loyalty, in the decision to build something beautiful from the ruins someone else created. And as the sun set on that chapter of their lives, Josh and Mariana walked forward into whatever came next, together, unbroken, and finally completely free.